So we're going to be jumping into our sustainability panel. I'm really excited to introduce all of our amazing panelists here. The sustainability panel is something that we always make sure that we have at our Civo Navigate events. It's near and dear to our hearts here at Civo, and we want to make sure that we have this discussion going. So very excited to hear from each of you. So I'm going to start with you, Dinesh, if you want to go through and introduce yourselves, and then we'll get started with some questions.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Sophia. So I am Dinesh. I am CTO here at Civo. Been involved in obviously building the cloud product that we have today, but I've also been involved building data centers around the UK. Have built, lucky enough to build 2, so understand some of the challenges as well down at the ground level of providing the infrastructure around that, and then building all the way up into the cloud.
Thank you.
Afternoon, everyone. My name is Simon Morris. I'm a sustainability specialist at Ricardo. I'm going to make a bold claim here and suggest I work for the oldest company in the room. We are 110 years old. And through that time, we started out, and the reason we've been around so long is we've innovated the services that we provide. We've started out involved in transportation and fuel production, and we've now evolved into through transition through renewable energy to provide a whole host of sustainability services. And we operate sort of an interesting space where we're advising governments and regulators on new policy that might influence sustainability in some way, shape or form. And then on the back of that, we can support and advise corporates on what they're doing. And the implications of all that is that if you're building a data center, we have expertise and capability that can support in the energy supply needs for the data center. If you're operating the data center, then we can advise on kind of efficient ways to do that. And if you're supplying equipment into the data center, then we can advise you on the sort of optimal efficiency of your equipment and the materials you use in that from a carbon perspective.
Thank you. Regent?
Hi, I'm Regent Lee, and actually, Simon, I think you're wrong. I work for the oldest institutions
Absolutely,
in the UK, probably by tenfold, University of Oxford. Trumped that, sorry. And I'm a surgeon scientist by training, and some of you may have heard my talk this morning. Through a series of interesting step changes, and now lead an international collaborative to build sustainable healthcare software solutions to transform radiology, and that's called AICT Consortium. We are in about, it's going to be in 25 countries with major healthcare systems, over 30 partners. And what we are doing.
Hi, good morning, everyone. So my name is Jonas Vermeulen, and I'm leading the sales engineering team for Nokia across Europe. We advise indeed customers on how to build out
medical device design and build. And from there, because we show the proposition of the technology being able to potentially decarbonize radiology tremendously, the European Commission gave us some funding to start this off. And being very mindful that the training of AI itself can create quite a significant carbon footprint, and therefore, as part of our operations, we really want to deploy what we consider as sustainable computing solutions, and hence we got working through Civo, and we'll talk more about that during the session.
Thank you. So we've had quite a bit of sustainability talk throughout the day. I'm going to go ahead and kind of kick off an opening question, and I'd love to hear from each of you. But what do you see as the most pressing environmental impacts caused by the tech industry today, and how are your organizations actively addressing them? I'm going to go ahead and start with you, Regent, if that's okay.
So I think from my talk this morning, and again I'll flag it up, is I come from the healthcare perspective, and in fact, if you look at the tech industry, I would like to flip it to say health service is actually very much tech-driven, and NHS being digitized just like any of the healthcare system is being digitized. And as part of that digitization process is a heavy element of AI deployment. So if we look at healthcare as a service itself, it actually creates a huge carbon footprint in addition to what we're doing to transform into the digital age. And part of this discussion today is really trying to draw awareness for people to look at healthcare slightly differently, not just as one thing that cures people, but potentially something that we should actively look at and examine on how to improve our well-being on a populational and also planetary aspect.
I think just picking up, Regent, on both your talk that you kindly gave this morning, one of the reasons that we started working so closely together was that the GPUs that you're using for training are liquid cooled, and the heat energy from that we're giving back for social good. So the data center of choice here is that the heat produced from the training data that you're using is going to heat a community swimming pool. And I think there's actually a huge opportunity here that we need to look at of, as we move AI, as we're moving some of the work that you're doing down into hospitals, how could we use what is considered a waste heat, and can we give that back into the hospital, of maybe even heating in the hospital would be quite useful.
Simon, I know you have an interesting perspective as well.
Well, I can maybe just follow a little bit on the kind of heat side of things. So one thing to be aware of is that DESNZ, the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero, recently announced some more funding to look at heat zoning. And as part of that initiative to look at heat zoning, that offers local authorities the opportunity to look at their area and then do some analysis to work out where a heat network might work best. And a heat network is a mechanism for supplying heat that could be used in swimming pools, it could be used in homes, it could be used quite widely. And so a lot of the work we've been doing is around that heat network zoning, to think about where there's a possibility of putting some heat networks. And then with that, you've got your anchor loads, so a hospital or a swimming pool, or you've got the supply of the heat as well in the data center. So we've been doing quite a lot of work to look at what the kind of different options are and how you map that out. Heat networks aren't easy to actually then implement, but that's why consultants exist, to try and solve those sorts of problems. That addresses a bit of, I guess, the heat problem. Obviously, there's lots around power that people talk around, and the energy consumption and the carbon emissions from the power, particularly if it's not green power that's being used. So we've been doing quite a lot of work around that. Some stats that can be quite concerning. So last year, somewhere in the region of 8.2 terawatt hours of electricity was from wind farms was curtailed because the network isn't able to deliver the power from the wind farm to the users. 8.2 trillion terawatt hours is 8.2 terawatt hours is just a phenomenon, but that's enough to power a 1 gigawatt data center. And the fact that that's just wasted, and not only that, we're paying for that. On top of that, a cost of 1.2 billion. There's something that needs to be kind of fixed within the system, and we all know that. Some of the things we've been doing to look at that is to work out where we could potentially place things like energy hubs that could be deployed to utilize some of that power, potentially for data centers. But the purpose of an energy hub is that it can be used for multiple off-takers as well. So we've been doing work around that. And the other kind of element to mention is what we've been talking around there is the energy use, and that's your sort of scope 1, scope 2 emissions in my language of carbon footprints. Actually, as much carbon is embodied within the data center and the components in the data center as well. So we've been looking at supporting some of the larger data center companies in exploring the embedded carbon within the products they're using within the data centers, which might not have a direct carbon footprint here, but they're emitting carbon when they're manufactured around the world.
Thank you. Regent, did you have something to add?
It's interesting. Also, today's a lot of the focus being on the sovereignty or data sovereignty. If you look at the healthcare system, actually, there's a big piece on resilience and how we manage energy and its usage and the data has a huge amount to do with how healthcare system can be resilient. I forgot to bring the picture. Despite the surplus energy, like just a few weeks ago at the hospital that I worked at, the radiology service was shut down because they ran out of power. And actually, you find that, I think 40%, the NHS England team is here, 40% of NHS Trust is still running on fossil fuels. And I did not realize that until a couple of years ago when I started looking into this angle. So a lot of sounding facts.
There's just another little bit, because as a consultancy we get involved in all sorts of interesting for us projects. There's a project we're running at the moment called Project Fortress, which is looking at what's defined as a protected site. So you have certain pieces of infrastructure or certain uses of power that are protected, have protected status. Hospitals are one of those protected sites. We've been looking at how you might be able to use demand flexibility at those sites to then free up some good capacity and then potentially allow other generators or off-takers to connect. I'm very surprised by the comment that the hospital is struggling because it is defined as a protected site, and that's maybe shows where the network is and the constraints we have.
Thank you. Dinesh?
Yeah, I think that we can't go and leave this question without talking about AI and some of the major, huge data centers that are being built. Probably not in the UK. If we were in the last session, we were hearing about the challenges around power in the UK. But talking to people in the hallway over the past few days, you're hearing about these absolutely insane projects being funded in the US around power, and that the inability for these massive data centers to get power means that they are shipping containers of gas turbines to be placed next to these massive AI sites. And then they're building massive gas pipelines to power all of this. And I don't think at the moment that there is a lot that when these projects are being started, that people are considering the environmental impact at this point, because we're in a time at the moment where it's a massive land grab and everything else is being put aside to just get advantages. And I think we need to be cognizant of that and aware of that as part of the conversation. And I think we've been having these panels now for maybe 4 years, and it's probably, I'd say, some of the hardest conversations and the hardest time to have this sustainability panel, because it's always a case now of there isn't enough power. If we don't get these GPUs online in the next 3 months, someone else will. So everything else, move out of the way, because this is now national security and it must be done.
Yeah, so I know we've kind of touched on it, but really drilling into that, Dinesh, what are some specific technologies, strategies, or design choices have proven most effective in cutting energy use or reducing emissions in your work?
I think, as I say, it's really quite tough. I think we're trying to do as much as we can with heat reuse, because these AI chips are massively power intensive. We're looking at data center racks where 15 kilowatts was the kind of max power draw, and we're talking about 150, 200 kilowatts in an individual rack now as kind of your standard deployments. The only thing we can do as a tech industry that I feel at the moment is to help push that, not get in the way, and then do what we can with what's left afterwards.
Simon or Regent, do you have anything to add to that?
I guess some of the projects that we've been involved in are aimed at reducing carbon. A lot of the projects we're involved in, but also aimed at trying to get around this issue there is with grid capacity and getting connections there. So to give some examples, there's something called the Strategic Innovation Fund, which is funding available from Ofgem that allows the network operators to carry out some trials on some innovative solutions that might help facilitate a faster transition to optimizing and using our grid a bit better. And so we've been involved in a number of those over the years. There's two that I mentioned the Project Fortress, which is actually a project that was funded through that means. If that project moves forward to implementation, then we will be tapping into some of that unused wind power, and we'll be reducing the amount of hydrocarbons that the hospital is using. So that's going to have a really kind of big implication for there. What we're then keen to do is think about how do we apply the learnings from that to other situations as well. How can we take that from, that's obviously supporting decarbonising the healthcare sector. But how do we then transition that and move that into other sectors as well? And data centres would be, and supplying data centres would be the kind of next on or one of the ones on the hit list. Other things that we've been working on is I mentioned the sort of life cycle assessment work we do. So that's, as I said, drilling into the components. The embodied carbon within a data center is about 60 to 70% of all the carbon emissions from a data center, and the remaining is the 30% in energy. So actually looking at what's going into that data center is going to have us, and mitigating the materials or changing the materials that are used is going to have as much of an impact as looking at the energy supply to that as well.
Absolutely. Regent, anything else to add?
Two things. I think on sort of healthcare specific examples, actually if you go back to radiology, right, and we know the energy come at different pricing and different carbon intensities throughout the day. And we are very used to providing services, like the core services during the daytime, whereas the energy is not as cheap compared to overnight, for example. And arguably, like if you look at countries such as Belgium, they have their CT scanner appointments running overnight, whereas in NHS, it doesn't happen, right? Overnight, everything shuts down, no operation. So some fundamental rethinks of how we deliver healthcare service can potentially reutilize the energy efficiency in that sense. Take it to the next step. You argue, well, perhaps the best way to, because 10% of NHS carbon footprint is on the transport, right? Getting people in and out of the hospital and transporting the goods. Perhaps the even more effective way of dropping the carbon footprint is actually, what can we do on a populational level to stop people from having to go into hospital in the first place? If you can get people healthy in a community rather than having to go in to see the doctors, maybe that is even more effective. And this, a lot of systematic rethink that's been going on through my engagement with stakeholders, and hopefully more to come in the future.
I think before we move on, great answer. Go on, Simon.
Well, I think that's a really important point, is that we can sit up here and talk about sort of technical solutions, but sometimes the solutions are not technical solutions. They're policy solutions or supporting people in different ways, aren't just about throwing money at kit.
Feels like I need to go out and get a run and not be I was just to say, like, I felt maybe I was a bit doom and gloom about AI, but it's also a huge opportunity as well. I mean, talking to Dan and his team that were on stage with Orbital Materials, they're using AI and generative AI to find new ways of doing carbon capture. So it is an opportunity as well, and generation of text and generation of code isn't the only thing that I'd ask the audience to think about. There's a huge leveling of the playing field with AI happening at the moment, and don't think that you need to build the next TripAdvisor. Really challenge yourself about what things you can see out there that are in your life that you can start changing and impacting, and using Gen AI leveling up here to try and find it. I know the team at Orbital Materials are doing that, and just challenge the audience to do the same thing.
Thank you. That leads well into the next question too. For this to really progress, we can't be working in silos. We really need to make sure that we're collaborating, whether that be across the industry or, like you said, Regent, like with individuals. So I'm curious, are there any industry-wide initiatives or things that we can do collaboratively to help drive this forward? I'm going to kind of leave it open-ended and see if anybody would like to pick that up. If not, then I can direct it.
I can jump in with a few, because I think here is where there's an opportunity to, I'm a glass half full kind of guy, and there's a few kind of ideas here which is really have the possibility of maybe moving the dial a little bit towards improving sustainability. They're all going to sound a little bit boring and regulatory, but they could have the potential to do that. So the first is there was an organization created called the National Energy System Operator, NESO. NESO's role is to look at the energy system holistically and at a regional level, and then map out the strategic direction to get to an end goal of increased grid capacity, reduced carbon, reduced energy prices, and it's as an organisation, it's the first time I think that I've seen sort of a proper strategic direction for the country and how it's going to use energy. And if it delivers what it could potentially deliver, it could have quite a significant impact, because what it's doing, and the reason it fits into this kind of collaboration story, is right now, and I'd recommend everyone to go out and do this, they're interested, there's a consultation, they're going around, they're speaking to all the local authorities, all the big energy users in the country, they're speaking to industry groups, trade bodies, to get their view on what the next 10 years looks like and what their energy needs are going to be. That's all going to get put into some big model to then sort of map out what we should have here, and then start to think about how they're going to take that forward. Now, it might be there's some AI sitting in in the analysis they're going to be doing to help along with that, but I think it's a positive initiative that could have an impact on the energy system. The other one I think is just I mentioned before is on the heat network side of things. Heat networks are a complicated beast. They need many different stakeholders to be working together, whether it's the heat supplier or the off-taker, consumers like ourselves. That needs collaboration to make these things happen. It's been something that's been going on in Europe for decades now, and they've been doing brilliantly at that. We really only just dabble in it, and we don't do it very well. And so there's quite a big exercise in collaboration that's needed to make sure we can take advantage of capturing some of the heat that Civo are doing a great job of doing at the moment.
Yeah, I think it's also, at least coming now from a cloud provider technology point of view, it's about being more open and transparent about where you are able to run your workloads and what choice we're giving consumers. I know in our regions, we tell you that the London 2 region is the one doing the heat capture, and you're able to make that choice of if you want to run the data there. If you go onto the Google console and you're starting to run up workload, as you go down the regions, they give you a little green symbol of a low CO2 region. So I think over the past few years that we have been able to hear what consumers are saying, and by giving you choice, there's the ability for you to then influence of, actually if there's more workload going into low CO2 data centers and low CO2 regions, the more and more will be put into that. So vote with your feet when you see these options.
Yeah. A lot of the reasons why we have this panel is to really get people thinking about sustainability in new ways. Now, Regent, I know you mentioned really individuals, so we've talked about more of a wider scale. What can individuals do? How can they help progress this forward?
I think individuality means we all bring something different to the table, and actually I see as an outsider to the sustainability niche, I look at things slightly differently, and I look at it as a healthcare problem. And in fact, if we look at the energy, all the things we talked about in sustainability beyond its commercial implications, if we truly look at it as a sustainability environmental problem, then really we're talking about a health problem. We're talking about a health problem for the planet, which affects us as individuals. And with that narrative, a healthcare professional or clinician scientist actually is very uniquely placed to bring collaborations into this systems approach. It's not just about energy now, it's not just about data centers. How can we collectively bring together our expertise and try to solve this planetary health problem collectively? And to me, that is the uniqueness of what individual, without prior restrictions of thinking, can bring to the table.
Thank you. So moving on to the next question, what do you see as the biggest challenges and opportunities for making data centers more sustainable in the coming decade, from energy sourcing to cooling to circular design? Dinesh, I'm going to start with you on that one.
It's going to be power. Absolutely is going to be power and availability of power. And that's not just AI related. Here in the UK, while there's a huge amount of wind capacity available, but actually getting that to where people are is a real challenge. And if we're doing things like heat networks, we actually need to have the compute and the heat generation near people. And it's a really, really difficult thing. And that's why I think some of the energy is being unused, because it's in a wind farm in the middle of a very windy place where people don't like to live.
Yeah, agreed. And that is, and so there's some thinking there to be done about where are the data centers located, and appreciate certain edge data or whatever need to be close to where they're used, but potentially there's opportunities to think about that, because it might be a faster way to get to the power. I think some of the other challenges that there are for it's not news, as mentioned before, is the energy pricing, and that's a big challenge for data centers, and to address that, then there needs to be some big changes in sort of the way that we manage our energy pricing.
And let's not forget, when we look at the whole circular design, there's the input, there's the output, but we can also put in storage solution. The excess runaway energy, we can store it for a rainy day, for resilience. That should be added into the equation.
I think one thing, it was mentioned that this morning actually, when we were talking about obsolete technology, and one of a really good opportunity for improving your sustainability is just not to change out the equipment so quickly. Just make it run a little bit longer. It's a money-making exercise, I think was the phrase that was used before. So just leave the servers running for a few more years, optimize, and then that's going to have a really big impact on the carbon emissions associated and the sustainability impacts.
Absolutely. Okay, so I'm going to ask one more question, purely because I really want to open it up to the audience too, so we can really continue the discussion and see what your thoughts are, what you'd like to hear a little bit more about. We have a really interesting perspective here on the panel. So my last question, I'm actually going to kind of scroll through here. It's going to be, data centers and AI are forecast to have huge societal benefits, improving healthcare provisions, reducing poverty, and improving education. How do we make sure this happens without unintended consequences of increased energy prices and increased water shortages for society? I'm going to go ahead and kind of go down the line. So I'm going to start with you, Dinesh.
I think this is a really big question. This is a really big question for the end of the day. I think it's about using it as an opportunity, as I said earlier, of don't be constrained with the thinking that we've had. AI is becoming, it should be seen as a great leveler and a great opportunity. There's obviously a huge risk. There's a huge amount of change going on in the tech industry, right? And people are worried about what their job will look like and will AI take over. But the other way of looking at it is, what has AI freed your time to do? Right? What do you not need to do now that you can start looking at some of these challenges? And, I'm hoping that there are a lot of very, very smart people around the room here today, and you've got much better ideas than I have. And what can AI free up to give you the opportunity to solve some of these problems?
Thank you.
So I've got two answers to one link to what we were saying before, which is around collaboration. I think there's not enough collaboration going on. I think the whole energy transition that we're going through at the moment requires more holistic thinking, and so it requires different stakeholders to engage with each other that maybe weren't engaging with each other before, and that can only have a kind of positive impact. And the other one's maybe a little bit more flippant. From what I've researched in advance of this, my brain uses 20 watts to complete an exaflop's worth of calculations. So why is a data center using so much power to do less calculations than my brain? And I put that as a challenge, because I'm not in any way the technical expert that can solve that. But if my brain's only using 20 watts, then we must be able to fix something.
It's curious, because IBM had come up with a neuro chip. I think it was last year, the year before, it's in Nature. They're actually doing biological chip to solve that problem. But collaboration, I think, actually NIHR, the funding bodies, have many funding schemes to look at this unintended consequence of energy transition. Collaboration is key, and I'm glad to see that my colleague from NHS England, the States teams here, we've been talking about setting up collaborations to fundamentally relook at the problem. It's been like training the next future generation of planet doctors, whereby they need to make sure that they can look after the planet without the unintended consequences. How do we do that? It's, for example, if we take it to the simple analogy, medical students, when they go to school, medical school, day one, they don't go and give people medicine. They don't go and cut people open for surgery. That's not what you do as day one as a medical student. You will have unintended consequences if you just start to learn how to prescribe drugs or how to do surgery. Day one medical student, go and learn anatomy, go and learn physiology. So we really should understand what the normality is before we can start to look at what is abnormal, because that's how we train professionally to progress, and that's how we can learn how to be safe, and to be safe means avoiding unintended consequences in this context.
Thank you.
Just another bit, actually, just thinking, just thought of an example there of the collaboration. It's something we've been working on at Ricardo, and it's taking some of the learning that we've had from developing cooling systems for Formula One engines, and we're applying that sort of thinking and that analysis to working with a chip manufacturer on how they might be cooling using that in cooling the data centers. And I think there's opportunities to look a little bit more kind of cross-industry and try to learn from what others are doing to then sort of work out how we could make data centers more sustainable. And that's going to need collaboration and information sharing.
Definitely. It's funny.
And so I think we need to have a serious conversation about what does sustainability mean for our power grid and how rapidly we can scale that up to meet the workloads that we want to have running in this country.
Dinesh, you're a big fan yourself.
If you look at the action plan, it's what, 7 500 megawatt data centers. That power is not just sitting idly somewhere in the UK.
And talking about AI, GPUs, I think it's definitely something that we need to start discussing. I would love to hear from the audience if you all have any questions or thoughts around this that our panelists can answer. I don't know if somebody in the back is able to help run a mic. No, I see some hands over here. If you want to bring it up to there we go.
Hi there. Yeah, I mean, I'm working with a guy. Working with a guy who owns a renewable energy solar panel blockchain company, but he also has created a stable coin to be able to, I mean, he can help fix a problem to do with a lot of, what you've mentioned, a lot of energy companies are running into with the carbon credits. So I was just curious to know whether or not you'd be open to, maybe having a look at that perhaps as an option. You're talking about collaboration.
Always open for collaboration, always open for discussion. So, yeah.
Awesome. All right, thank you. I'll speak to you after.
Thank you.
Thank you. My name's Ben from Synachron. I'm interested, so if 70% of data center spend is in the cloud, I think it is our responsibility to put pressure on the cloud vendors, all of them, to improve their record. I think GCP are doing a fantastic job. AWS, okay. And Azure are doing an absolute crapshoot. They are doing terribly at their responsibility. And I wonder, instead of just shouting into the void at our sales reps, how do we collaborate? How do we get together and tell these guys what they need to do?
I think it's by asking and keep asking, and then starting to go move with your wallet, right? It is unfortunately the biggest way you can do it is start moving workloads, and we as a community start shouting about it. It's why GCP have made that, is because they have heard about it and they're seeing people move to do that. Our work as well, we've done it because we've heard about it and we're hearing some great stories and great use cases from it. As a consumer, the biggest thing is move with your wallet, and Microsoft will hear very quickly.
I would definitely agree with that. We spend a lot of time providing commercial advice to some of our clients on their procurement, and it's often around sustainability and the sustainability credentials that they need to consider when they're buying new services, whatever those services are. So I think that's going to go a long way. It's worth noting that the Commission are looking at sustainability standards for data centers. There's a tender out at the moment, which hopefully we're successful with, and they will be looking at a range of different criteria that they'll use to ultimately give a data center a rating, like an A, B, C, D, E rating. And that will be a metric that can then be used to compare quite easily across data centers to see how they're performing, and then ultimately move with you on the wallet if you need to.
A bit like the food hygiene rating for the takeaways. I want to share this personal story of how we actually got to work with Civo. It's purely serendipitous, and it's buyer's power or people's choice power. We run this Horizon Europe Grant Consortium, and as part of that, we had to source our green compute provider. And it's totally independent of me, even though I was the chief investigator. We have a team led by John here, actually, the public contributors from 15 people across the globe. They take part in this people-driven decision-making process, and there's an ethics management committee within the consortium, and they had some set criteria, which I had as script sheets that includes like the energy source, water usage, efficiency, power usage, efficiency, 6-7 criteria, which then they took away and they assessed internally. And they had all the major providers, they ranked it, they voted 3 roundtables, and they came back and said, actually, Civo on Deep Green server met most of the metrics spot on, and they outvoted the others. And it just so happened I also knew Civo in my parallel life, and they just converge. And so people's choice, and they actually voted. And I think that's a very good story of how we actually met as consumer.
And I think, though, you've got to, when you go through this procurement process, is you can't have sustainability as a checkbox at the end that you then ignore when you see the price tag. I've been on the other side of procurement so many times, and we think we do a good job when we present, yes, we do a good job with sustainability, and we'll go into that sales cycle and that sales conversation, and you see the questions at the end of it, and it's normally at the end, it's not top center, but you can make small choices here with how you present a procurement document by put sustainability at the top. Give it, when you create your little Word doc, give it the most amount of space and imply that this is a really important part of the decision that you are making into why you're choosing the provider, and not have it as a footnote at the end.
And I think there's just another bit to I think that's a really great point, is for those in the room to think about that these procurement criteria are coming. That's why the Commission has put this in place, is to then start moving that towards. So if you yourselves are not thinking about this now, then you want to start thinking about it, because it will become 10%, 15%, 20% of the weighting as it goes through, as time moves on, depending on how well we're all progressing on sustainability.
Yeah. Just to add to what you were saying, Dinesh, it's definitely something that it can't just be a marketing effort. It's got to be something that's baked all the way through. And that's something that I know Civo has done since day one. It's something that I know Mark, our CEO, is very passionate about. So that's really what has driven a lot of the conversation and making sure that we have it all the way through our business, not with just even GPUs, but through every way that we think. But thank you. Any other questions? Thank you.
Thanks. It's great to see this on the panel. I'm actually ex-Ricardo, Simon.
I recognise you, Ollie. How are you doing?
Yeah, very good, thank you. So one of the things I've done in the last couple of years is create an open source project called the Tech Carbon Standard. It doesn't just cover tech, but the idea is a lot of this conversation is quite tricky because sustainability is its own world, technology is its own world. Those two stakeholders collaborating is quite hard. So yeah, folks, check that out. But I wanted to ask was, you talked a little bit about Deep Green, I think, but one of the companies that's really impressing me is Heater. And I don't know if you've seen them, they're basically putting a small computer on the side of people's hot water boilers. I do wonder whether like moving the compute and moving the problem to like where the heat demand is maybe easier than trying to build these heat networks. I just wondered whether you saw that kind of consumerization of AI, with open source and so on being sort of part of the answer here.
I think there's several companies. In fact, I think Deep Green started off doing that. And then there's at least one other company I know that does that. So, yes.
I think what we've got to solve from a technical challenge before projects like Heater, which, again, we know about and we back, is that there's got to be this element of trust, security, and touching on our other thing today about sovereignty, of it's all very well saying that, yes, we can move compute to a heat, but if you go to an enterprise and say, what we're going to do is we're going to take some of your data, we're going to give it to Joe down the street, because when he wants a bath, we will need to heat his hot water up. So it's Joe's ADSL connection that will go up and down. And by the way, Joe's a hacker, and he's actually started tinkering with the device that's in there. So there's actually a lot that we need to do from a technical standpoint of things like trusted compute that gives us the ability to have workload go into these really unfriendly environments. And I think once we solve challenges, once we solve that and give enterprise the idea that yes, this can go there, it will be untouched, it will have the heat reused, and your data will be safe before things like heater can really take off.
I would just add from an engineering perspective, we're talking about waste heat and using the waste heat. We shouldn't be wasting anything. So if we can get that heat into a heat network, I don't know what the commercial situation is with Civo, but for some data centers, organization we're speaking to, they're not going to sell the heat. There's no commercial consideration here. They don't want a revenue stream for that. In fact, it's quite the opposite. It would be too complicated to get a revenue stream from that. Here's some free heat. Go and use that for a good purpose. And so heat networks are a great way to sort of utilize that.
Yeah, and we give the heat away for free. It is completely given with no strings attached.
Thank you. I think we have time for either 2 more quick questions or 1 more question. Anybody else? It looks like, yeah, go here, and then we'll do 1 more over here, Finley.
Hi guys, thank you for the panel. Could I ask, if I were to ask about in terms of resources, so for example, for a data center, okay, either any sort of data center, do you think, let's say, if we have, if anyone's got a collaboration with a power provider, for example, okay, obviously we want, at least in the long term, sustainability, right? Don't you think that power companies, especially when they're providing services for data centers or even for AI systems, don't you think they should shift their, because they're dealing with the business, they should shift their sort of marketing strategy of saying, you know what, we will give you such and such, for example, like a less, yeah, that will allow so that, for example, there's less energy wastage, obviously. Okay, one, as you know, that even in the power sector, you get dissipation of heat through the cables, okay, and certain other circuitry and that sort of thing, of course, okay. But don't you think that at least power companies should actually start moving in that sort of direction, that you come to me as a power company and say, you know what, we are such and such company, and this is why we think would be a good fit for you, because we're going to be trying our best, at least, to, number one, put your costs down as much as possible, but at the same time, at the same time, being much more sustainable. Or am I wrong in that?
I think what you're saying is to put the onus on the energy supply companies to do something about energy efficiency and making sure energy is used more efficiently and effectively. Absolutely, there's a possibility of doing that. What things is ringing in my ears? You want to do that? Let's nationalise the energy supply, and actually put it in control, so it's not kind of this market-based mechanism that ends up with us having some of the most expensive electricity in the UK, in Europe. But that's a bit controversial, and that's not a Ricardo statement.
Any other comments on that before moving on? Awesome. Okay, I think we had 1 more over here, and then we'll go ahead and wrap up after that.
Thank you. Hi, Jack from NHS England, doing some work with Regent. But my biggest question really, I guess, is mainly aimed at Dinesh, just around, you talk about price point being the biggest barrier for your customers selecting the more sustainable options. I'm just interested in what you and Civo are doing to try and reduce that, and what the industry is doing as well to try and drive sustainability. Because I guess if you're really serious about sustainability, providing that option at a cheaper, more affordable rate will drive adoption.
I think at the very least at the start, it needs to be the same. Like if you're going to a provider and they're saying, hey, the sustainable option is going to cost you more money, it's a non-starter. So at the very least, it's got to be the same price. But we're able to do it at a lower price because of the choices that we've made. Sort of the energy that we're procuring through Deep Green in that London 2 region is able to allow us to offer it at that lower price. So that's what we're doing. And I think around we can't have, as I say, we can't have this at a higher price point.
One thing I guess just to reflect on is that it's not just about price when you're doing your procurement evaluation. There's a number of different metrics in there. So price would be one of them. Sustainability is another. And if you were to flip the relative proportional value of those evaluation criteria, then you would end up with potentially more sustainable solution.
I think also that generally we're trending down to the same price point. From a technology point of view, you're getting broadly the same service across all of the providers. We do have issues about interoperability that, I think the previous talk was talking about the CMA and some things in Europe about allowing that and opening that up. But, we're in a position at the moment where you are locked into certain providers. You cannot move between providers, but there is opportunity to move within the provider. So at the very least, start doing that, start moving towards that choice that you are making, moving internally within the provider to that greener, more sustainable option before potentially looking at a larger migration and going, we need to wholesale move out. There are still things that you can do while trapped.
Awesome. I think that's all of our time for today. So thank you all so much. I really appreciate it. Can we give our panelists a big round of applause?